Hello, and welcome to Learning Heroes webinar, the first public release of our most recent national survey, Parents 2018, Going Beyond Good Grades. I'm David Park. I'm Senior Vice President, Strategy and Communications for Learning Heroes. And today we will not only walk you through the data, but also hear reflections from some of our partners on the ground and some thoughts about how this research can be used in ongoing parent engagement efforts. We'll be presenting the research in 4 brief sections, each followed by a reflection. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so if you have questions, please submit them via the chat box located on the control panel during the presentation, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the webinar. We are going to reserve some time at the end for questions. So you can also use this box to submit any technical issues if you're having any. Before we kick off, I'd like to introduce our presenters and partners for today. They include Learning Heroes founder and president, Bibb Hubbard, Adam Burns, the Chief Operating Officer at Edge Research, Michelle Montemayor with the Texas PTA, Whitney Henderson from Ed Navigator, and Landon Mascarenas from A+ Colorado. We also have Wendy Lopez-Aflito, the Vice President of Content and Partnerships at Learning Heroes. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and available on our website, which is www.bealearninghero.org. That's bealearninghero.org. And now I would like to turn it over to Bibb Hubbard, founder and president of Learning Heroes.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you to all of you for joining us today on the webinar. We're absolutely thrilled with the response that we've gotten and really appreciate your time. Before diving into the details of the findings and the research, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about Learning Heroes, as well as a little bit of context around parent mindsets, and then we'll turn it over to Adam Burns to kind of dive in. So I founded Learning Heroes in 2014 to inform and equip parents to best help their children's educational success. And we do that, as you can see by this slide here, by listening to parents, which we take very seriously. Over the past 4 years, we've conducted an unprecedented amount of research among parents, teachers, principals, guidance counselors, students themselves, and you can see we've conducted more than 100 focus groups, 10 national surveys, ethnography, and importantly, we focus on parents of color, low-income parents, and conduct all of our research in English and in Spanish. We take the research insights and we create parent-friendly content, tools, and resources, and we disseminate and distribute them to parents through these incredible organizations that you see here today. We are humbled to call these organizations our partners, and in fact, this is just a small sampling of the organizations with whom we work. And I'm incredibly proud to say that in 2018, with thanks to these organizations you see, we reached over 16 million parents with our content and resources. So really thrilling for us to be in that position. And so now I want to set the stage a little bit and provide you with some context around parent mindsets. So something to keep in mind as we're diving into this year's data. Importantly, and for those of you who are parents like myself, this won't be too surprising, but parents own the responsibility for their child's in-school success. So you can see here, parents put themselves and their children, at the center with that primary responsibility. This is job one for a parent. Only 12% of parents say it's the teacher's job to make sure that their child is doing well in school. And then also, again, not super surprisingly, but we think is really important and important to remember that an overwhelming majority of parents, 80%, believe it's very important for their child to get a 2- or 4-year degree. And it's 85% for African American families, 89% for Latino families, and in fact, a full 75% of parents expect their child to get a 2- or 4-year degree. So critically important, high aspirations from parents for their children. And that's critical as we dive into this other finding that we revealed in 2016. And what we found was that 9 out of 10 parents, and this is regardless of race, income, education levels, believe that their children are at or above grade level in both reading and in math. And as you can see from this data here, this is NAEP data. There's many forms of data, but just over a third of students are performing at grade level, a far cry from the 9 out of 10 of parents who perceive their children to be performing at grade level. So we call this the disconnect. And in fact, when you ask teachers, teachers say only 39% of their students show up prepared for grade level work, and it's only 15% for students in high poverty schools. So teachers are pretty squarely, they know what's going on, and it lines up with this NAEP data. And so for us, everything we do here at Learning Heroes is to help parents have an accurate, complete picture of their child's academic and developmental progress and achievement. For us, that is job one. Parents deserve that accurate picture. So with that as a backdrop, I'm going to give you a little bit of context and framing for our research this past year. And so as you can see here, we wanted to understand what was driving that disconnect, that 9 out of 10 parents who believe their child's at or above grade level in reading and math, despite the reality that, just over a third are performing at grade level. What are the drivers of that? What's underneath that? And to further, we wanted to understand what are the thresholds of involvement? How are parents involved in their child's education to really understand their behaviors, their actions, the drivers of that? And in addition, what would it take to give parents this accurate and complete picture? What are the opportunities? What are the barriers as we're striving to, again, give parents this complete picture of their child's academic success so that they can be involved and informed and supportive in the most effective ways for their own child. So with that as a backdrop, one last thing I'll leave you with before I turn it over to Adam Burns. After we've been through all of this research, there are sort of 3 burning questions for us that are driving our work forward that I invite you guys to help us think about and grapple with as we move forward. And one, imagine if parents know what teachers know, right? Teachers have, obviously, they know how their students are performing. Imagine if parents had access to the same forms of data and information so that they could best help support their children. And then secondly, you'll hear a lot from Adam about the report card, and not surprisingly, the report card plays a critical role for all of us in our child's academic career. How can we use that report card that parents rely on so heavily as an agent of change, potentially, to get them this more accurate picture? And then importantly, we found that there's a lack of incentives. There's really no reason, nobody's pushing to give parents an accurate picture. We see this as a critical equity issue for parents and for students. So how can we create some incentives within the system to make sure parents get that accurate and complete picture? So this is what's driving our work, and we invite you to join us in this journey, and hopefully you'll follow up with this after the webinar to help us think these questions through. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Burns from Edge Research, our partner in research here at Learning Heroes, to talk about the data.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bib. It's been a pleasure to be able to partner with you and Learning Heroes in such important, groundbreaking work. We'll start with the methodology, and Bib's 100% right. The research we've done is extremely robust, and for this effort specifically, over 80 qualitative sessions across 6 locations across the country, and 2 quantitative surveys as well. One among parents, focused on parents of 3rd through 8th graders. We also did oversamples for this survey. Basically, that means extra interviews, so we could get a better understanding of some key audiences. Those oversamples were among parents among African Americans, Hispanics, as well as parents of charter school students. Survey offered in both English and Spanish. But to get not just the parent perspective, we also glean the teacher perspective as well through a very strong national online teacher survey, over 1,000 teachers of 3rd through 8th graders. With that, let's start on that deeper dive among parents, get a sense of what parents are thinking, and build off of what we know anecdotally. What we started with as an overall goal was, is there a way to get a better understanding of parent mindset? We know that parents are not monolithic. They're not one and the same. So is there some way that we can segment parents based on the way in which they approach their child's academic achievement? And we were able to do so. We were able to identify 4 relatively evenly distributed groups that show some differences among parents across the country, again, 3rd through 8th graders, based on how likely they are to have an accurate picture, whether or not they think their child is excelling, in addition to other demographic and psychographic measures we included in the survey. Now, we want to emphasize that this is a framework. It is not to label, it is not to stereotype, and we found through qualitative that parents sometimes are in different segments depending on their child or their age of child, but it was really, really instructive to think about how these parents differ. So let me take a moment and introduce these groups with a bit more specificity. And we'll start with the two that are most likely to have an accurate picture. The first being the AOKs, right at 25% of parents. And overall, the parents report that their children are independent. They're definitely academic achievers. And parents know that both from what's going on in the classroom, but also how well that child is doing on state tests. These parents also are more likely to have an advanced degree. They are very open to information about how well their children are doing, but because their children are doing so well and are independent, they take a step back and only need a light touch from teachers or the school to get engaged. So that is one side of the spectrum of the two groups of parents who are likely to have an accurate picture. The other group, they're called the problem solvers. They're about 22% of parents, and they're a bit different. They admit and understand that their child has an obstacle or a challenge. It could be social emotional difficulty or otherwise, but they report that their child is actually a below grade level in at least one subject or quarter, say their child has an IEP. So these parents are already engaged because they know that there's an issue that needs to be overcome. They have that clear, accurate picture because they're actively communicating with teachers already. Well, let's look at the two remaining groups. These are the folks who are less likely to have an accurate picture, and we have the acceptors. These are 30% of parents in our segmentations, and they overall think their child is fine. As parents, they worry less in general. They think their child is respectful, independent, and again, they think their child is just doing fine. So they don't think there's necessarily an issue or a reason to get more involved than they are. The parents themselves didn't necessarily enjoy school. They're also less likely to feel that college is essential compared to their counterparts. So this is an area where it is a bit more challenging to try to get these parents involved because they are skeptical of the information they receive from their child's schools. And we'll round out the four segments with the protectors. They are 23% of parents. They say their child's self-motivated, their child's social. But what's interesting is that this group has a bit of a false sense of security. These are the worriers. When we talk to them via focus group or in the survey that they might not have an accurate picture of how well their child is doing, they take a step back and wait, hold on a second here, maybe I don't have a clear picture, and then they get a bit more engaged. So again, very different from the acceptors. All of these groups have some interesting differences that are illustrated in their levels of involvement. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, let's pause for our first partner reflection. David, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Adam. So I want to briefly turn it over to Michelle Montemayor, who's in San Antonio, Texas, to respond to the data about parenting styles that Adam just addressed. Michelle, as someone who has worked with a lot of parents in Texas districts, and now through your role with the National PTA as a National PTA Fellow, I'm curious how these parenting styles speak to your own experience. So knowing that parent perceptions drive engagement, what are some of the ways you've connected with parents so they have a more accurate picture of their child's achievement?
Well, thank you, David. The first way as a parent coming in, I know that I was probably every one of those categories throughout my child's school year. And I have two children, so it definitely went back and forth. As a leader, I tend to see that we have a lot of protectors and acceptors. And as a PTA leader, we are trained to engage with our families and make sure that we help bridge the gap from the disconnect and get our families the information they need. Obviously, through volunteerism is a great way because you have that comfort level where you can ask questions that they have a right to ask, and they need to know who they can ask questions pertaining to their child or the school or whatever the case may be. So PTA tends to focus on that by educating and engaging our parents during programs and events and we want them to feel empowered and know that they are an integral part of their student success. So every category that you've talked about, I've met a parent probably in that category, myself included, and we just want them to know that there are resources, and it's our job as leaders to provide that to them and to help bridge that gap and get them communicating with.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks very much. Adam?
You're welcome.
Great. Let's keep going and dive into the disconnect with greater specificity. And we'll start with the parent mindset around it. And we've already talked about parents think that their children are doing well. Bib opened the presentation with some important data to that on that point, to that front. But it's also important to keep in mind that parents are confident they know they have a clear picture. So when we ask them, so how confident are you that you have a clear understanding of how well your child is doing academically? We have over 8 in 10 parents, 82% saying that they are extremely or very confident that they know how their child is doing academically. That response is consistent across subgroups. We see a little difference where parents of daughters are a bit more confident than parents of sons, but even across gender of child, it's still an overwhelming confidence that they have a clear idea of what's going on with their children academically. So if they're confident here, what do parents worry about? And through several surveys we conducted with Learning Heroes and otherwise, we asked what are some items that parents worry about. And what we find here is the top response in a 5-point worry scale. This is the percent of parents say they worry a lot about these items. And what rises to the top, happiness, emotional well-being, peer pressure, the social element, and being able to navigate the internet safely. We see that as the top tier repeatedly when it comes to parent worries. It's interesting that worry overall was up compared to last year on everything that we tested, but this is where parents squarely focus their concerns about their child. And beneath that, and you have to take a bit of a jump beyond those to get to more of the academic items included in the survey. Now, for the first time, we also wanted to get a sense of what teachers thought about this. What are they worried about when they think about their students? And their worries are a little bit different. They really focus on what's going on in the home. We have 4 in 10 teachers say they worry a lot about the challenges their students may be facing, whether it be poverty, food insecurity, and otherwise, but also the academic support. What are parents doing at home or not doing at home to help support their children? So that's what teachers are worried about. At home, we already see here some interesting differences between parents and teachers, and we're going to explore other areas in which we see parent and teacher perception and attitudes, how they differ. And we're going to start with involvement. We asked parents and teachers to get a sense of what's the ideal level of parent involvement. So for parents, the question was on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 means you would not be involved at all, you're never helping with homework, never communicating with teachers or the school. A 10 means you're doing both of those regularly. What's ideal? And for teachers, similar scale, but what's ideal for a parent? And as you can see on the screen here, very consistent results between parents and teachers, about 8 and 10 among both groups saying that an 8 through 10 on that 10-point scale is where ideally parents should be. Well, of course, we took that a step further to say, okay, where are you actually? And parents said, well, all right, I'm about 2/3 of us are in that 8 to 10 range, think that we're pretty involved, using the same scale. This is actuality. What about teachers? Well, teachers have a bit of a different perspective. Only 28% of teachers think that the parents of their students are in that 8 to 10 involvement range. So already another example of different perceptions, this time of involvement, when we're talking about parents and teachers and their involvement in their child's academics. Now, we wanted to get a sense of what that involvement means. How are parents involved? And we asked them to indicate which of the following of this list you see on the screen have you done in the most recent school year. They could select any or all that apply, so that's why you see such high percentages. And the top results are what we would call the usual suspects. 2/3 attending a parent-teacher conference. Then we have folks saying they're accessing grades through online portals. 55% majority saying that they're communicated with their teacher outside of the parent-teacher conference, and that's really overarching the top tier. We see some interesting differences between elementary and middle school parents, with the elementary school parents more likely to mention that parent-teacher conference, the middle school parents most likely to mention the portal, but still similar results in terms of what's in that top tier. What's also interesting is that we have about 28% who say that they reviewed information about the school's performance compared to other schools. There'll be more on that in a moment. But all of this is all well and good, but where it really becomes important is if this involvement actually matters. And we asked teachers, so do you notice any difference? And we had almost 8 in 10, 78% of the teachers surveyed said that they believe the students whose parents regularly communicate with them do better academically than the students whose parents do not. This is the teacher perspective on how parent involvement matters. A great time for another partner reflection. David, back over to you.
Great. I'd now like to connect with Whitney Henderson from Ed Navigator in New Orleans. Whitney, you were a teacher and a principal before Ed Navigator, and you know firsthand some of the barriers to parent-teacher communication, such as time and language and cultural differences, the school's openness to parent engagement, and the fact, as we've talked about, that many parents think their child is doing well. So what have you seen that actually works to bring parents and teachers together for what could be some tense and possibly uncomfortable conversations?
Thank you, David. One of the things that we have seen that works is this idea of schools shifting from engagement on the school's term to engagement on the family's term. And I think the previous slide is such a good segue into this conversation because just the sheer thought of mentioning that 78% of the teachers believe that parents should engage with them. We think that belief stems from, our system's belief that we should make this work much more sustainable for teachers, otherwise we'll lose them, or school staff, otherwise we'll lose them. And while that may be true, it shouldn't be at the expense of discounting a potential relationship with a family who can alleviate much of what a teacher may stress over, particularly related to their child. So things like scheduling an open house from 4 to 5:30 p.m. makes it very inaccessible for many families. The average parent gets off at about 5 p.m. or later, and hourly workers can't give up income to leave work early. Some events are unannounced with just a few days' notice, and again, the assumption is that families must adjust their schedules. So the schools that we see that do well at this, they post grades online in portals that are updated regularly. They are willing and able to have conversations via phone with families. And the schools that oftentimes struggle with these, we see that those websites are often poorly maintained and they're inconsistently updated. So families don't really know how children are doing. So the schools that are committed to this, they communicate well, they communicate clearly in advance with attention to translating documents for families who will need it. And when they're serious about getting families to school, they spread out options across multiple days and times so that there's an option that suits just about every situation. And they do fewer, better planned gatherings than that have much more of a clear purpose than not. And then the last example, David, would be this idea of honesty. So parents simply don't know how their children are doing in school, and that's because they receive so many different fragments of information at so many different times from so many different voices. And the information doesn't add up to one clear story. My colleague at Ed Navigator, Rami Johnson, just wrote a blog called Please Don't Go Down the Pity Highway, which detailed her experience with her daughter's school, who embellished how she was truly performing with praise about her behavior, manners, her compliance, how awesome she was to be in class. And far too often, schools are shying away from the difficult conversations around performance to avoid conflict, or sometimes they just don't believe that parents can do much to help solve the problem. So why demoralize them? But our experience at Ed Navigator has said otherwise. We found that families are desperate for the truth and will take any steps within their power to do anything because they're willing to do that. They want to be their champions for their children and understand that the stakes are getting a good education are high. And when schools are misleading about performance, students don't get the help that they need, and that's not okay.
Thanks so much, Whitney.
So let's take all that great information and go one step further to the disconnect and really get at the epicenter of it, which, as Bib mentioned at the outset, is really the report cards. And we'd heard through qualitative as well as conversations with partners. Of course, there was a lot of conversation about report cards, but let's really dive into a report card and how it serves as a measure of achievement. So as part of the survey, both surveys among parents and teachers, we did a really deep dive into several measures of achievement. You see them on the screen here, and we conducted what's known as a trade-off analysis, where you really put one against the other, through a series of questions. So you're really asking respondents, when push comes to shove, which they prefer. Specifically, we ask parents, please select the one that is most important to you when it comes to assessing how well your child is achieving academically. What's great about this exercise, known as the MAC-STIF, is that order, of course, is important, but also magnitude matters. How much one item rests above another one absolutely is important. So we see here the top tier is overwhelmingly grades on the child's report card, number one, closely followed by whether or not the child struggles with homework. So what the parents say they are looking to most often, what's most important to them in terms of assessing how well their child is doing, it's the report card grades and what they see when their child is dealing with homework at home. Of course, this is important to see one part of this perspective, but let's look at what teachers think. And for teachers, we ask them, which one would you tell parents is the most important for them to look at to assess how well their child is achieving academically? And we see some really interesting differences. Report card is third and nowhere near in the same ballpark as what rises to the top, regular communication with the teachers. That's number one with a bullet, followed by graded work and tests, quizzes from the teacher, and it's only after that do we get to grades on the child's report card. So a big difference there. Where we see some similarities is also extremely illustrative. And if we look at the bottom of the slide, we note that both parents and teachers are not necessarily viewing the results from annual state tests as an important way to measure achievement. But I think it's also important to note where both parents and teachers place parent-teacher conferences. Again, this is the number one way in which parents stay connected and interact during the school year, and it is next to last among parents and really middle of the road among teachers. So a lot of findings here in this one slide to show how, in some ways, parents and teachers have some similar reviews when it comes to that annual state test and parent-teacher conference, but very different perspectives when we talk about report cards. So let's take this information that we have about measures of achievement and tie it back to the disconnect. We have 2/3 of parents who say that their children typically gets A's, or they get mostly A's and B's on the report card. But what those grades mean is how we get into the disconnect problem. Because we also have 84% of parents believing that A's or B's mean their child is doing the work expected of them at their grade level. So parents are connecting grades on a report card with grade level expectations. This is what parents see. What do teachers see when they look at report card grades? Well, we ask teachers what are some different elements that might be included in report card grades. Again, this is another multiple response question. We see most 78% say, yeah, it's achievement, it's mastery of concepts, but it also includes progress, participation, effort, including all of these other items here in that grade. Again, we know that it's different from what parents are seeing. And we have almost half of teachers, 48%, saying that report card grades measure effort more than they measure achievement. So in addition to that finding, we now have 64% of teachers who say that parents focus too much on report card grades alone. So not only is there a difference, but teachers are thinking that parents are looking a bit too much and holding those report card grades a little bit too high in their esteem. So these are just some initial important differences in interpretation between parents and teachers that really helps to foster the disconnect. But now let's shift into some of the elements that Whitney was bringing up, which is parent-teacher communications more specifically. And we asked teachers on the teacher survey, when are you likely to contact parents? And we gave a list of different scenarios, situations. That's what you see on the left side of the screen. Again, a 5-point scale. The darker percentage is when the teacher said they definitely would contact the parent in this situation. The lighter orange or yellow is when they would be very likely to contact. And you see, number one, students misbehaving. 82% student misbehaving in class. The teachers definitely are very likely to contact the parent, closely followed by the students not made progress, but over the course of the whole grading period. Those are the top two. Now, in addition to all the other data that you see here, I'm not going to read all the results, but there are two other key points that I want to mention because I think it's really illustrative of the parent-teacher communication issue that the results from this survey bring to light. One, there isn't one scenario that you see on this screen that gets 50% of teachers, a majority of teachers, saying they definitely would contact the parent if this happened. Everything is below 50%, so there isn't a majority. Also, on every single item, an elementary school teacher is more likely than a middle school teacher to contact the parent. So as we see that transition from elementary to middle school, it ratchets up the complexity and what it would mean or what it would take for a middle school teacher to reach out to a parent of a middle school student. The next question that these findings lend themselves to is, well, what's the barrier here? Why is there a hesitation to have the teacher talk to the parent? And teachers tell us that, and over 7 in 10 tell us that they're worried that the parents are going to blame the teacher. It's the teacher's fault that the child isn't performing. And then we have another majority of teachers saying that the parent might not believe the teacher. Because remember, one of the top 2 measures of achievement for parents was what the parent sees at home. So if what the parent sees at home is different than what the teacher is reporting, then there is conflict, and that leads to hesitation of why a teacher may not communicate difficult information to parents. Again, a great opportunity to pause. David, let me pass it over to you for another partner reflection.
Great. And this is our final partner reflection, and it's from Landon Mascarenhas from A+ Colorado in Denver. Landon, given your former role in family engagement at the Denver Public Schools and now your advocacy role at A+ Colorado, what would you say is the advocacy community's role in helping ensure that parents have an accurate picture of their child's achievement?
Well, thanks for the question, David. And first off, I just want to say thanks to Learning Heroes for conducting this important research. You know, we really need to break out of our existing schema around what parent-educator relationships should look like. It's one of the reasons why I prefer the term partnership instead of engagement. I feel like engagement means everything to everyone, and so therefore it means nothing, versus partnership, I think, gets much closer to what you all are doing research around here. And so I guess just a few things. First is these survey results we've just now looked at on teacher perceptions are a really fascinating insight. They're a great reminder of why we need partnership that kind of build out from relationships and ongoing communications before we can have real interventions and conversations between parents and educators. I mean, fundamentally, we need cultures of academic partnership in our schools. And, you know, the Flamboyant Foundation has done a lot of really important research into this, and it really was the premise of a lot of our work in Denver Public Schools. And, you know, I really just love what Whitney talked about. You know, we really need to be clear that our families have a right to know. They have a right to know how their students in schools are performing. And that the premise of this has to be based in relationship communications and sharing power. You know, there's no tool out there that's going to get us there. There's no magic Excel tracker or magic app that's going to get us to that perfect spot. The reality is that advocacy groups need to put pressure on schools and district systems to build the cultures of academic partnership, to ensure that parents and families have the guarantee to that rights to know, which means building coalitions with the families and to seek these changes in the systems to what we've been talking about. That means when we put pressure on the system to ensure that we're embedding this regular communication that you all are showing us in the survey results, which I think are so critical. That could be work like home visiting, that's actually asking us to build relationships and academic partnership, community progress monitoring at the school level, district level honesty. Again, no tool is going to get us there, and no report card is going to take us places. You guys have very clearly shown here in the data. It's also really clear that parent-teacher conferences are fundamentally broken from both a parent and an educator perception level. So we need new structures and systems to come up in their place, and advocacy groups and educators and families need to take the front lines in demanding these new systems and structures.
Great, thank you, Landon.
And with all of this information, it is good to be able to then reinforce or close the data portion of the presentation with good news. And the good news is that this disconnect is absolutely solvable. And the way that we came to that conclusion is that first we shared the disconnect, the one that Bib talked to us about at the beginning of this presentation, with the parents in the survey. to get a sense of what their reactions might be to this disconnect. And when we share this information, that the difference between what parents think or how they think how well their children are doing with what actual data reflect, we noticed that parents changed some perspectives. Again, initially, before hearing about the disconnect, we had 82% extremely or very confident they had a clear picture of how well their child is doing. After we shared that paragraph about the disconnect, that dropped 17 points. It's only 65% who have that same level of confidence. And what's even more important and illustrative than that is that drop is relatively consistent across all of the key subgroups included in our survey. Now, we didn't stop there. We also wanted to see, is there anything else that can help easily change parents' perspectives when it comes to how clear a picture they have of their child's academics? And again, we started with almost 9 in 10, 88% thinking their child was at or above grade level in math. And then we did what's known as a split sample. We gave half of our survey respondents one scenario, the other half a different scenario, to see if that necessarily changed what percentage these parents thought that their child was at or above grade level in math. And for the first half, we said, okay, your child receives a B in math, and your child didn't meet expectations on the state test. And with those two pieces of information, we go from 88% down to 61% thinking their child is at or above grade level in math. Now, with that second half of our survey sample, we then added one other piece of information, which is your child's school received an overall performance rating of C. So again, child B in math, doesn't meet expectations on the state test, and here's a school performance rating of C. Now we're down to 52% believing their child is at or above grade level in math. Again, starting from 88. Huge, huge differences as parents get more information that they can use and then reflect upon to get a sense of how well their child is doing. With that, let's turn it back over to Bib Hubbard to give some more thoughts about these findings.
Thank you, Adam, for all this incredible, rich data. My reflection is that we're super encouraged by what you just heard from Adam around the fact that parents are responsive to different kinds of information. And as Whitney said, every parent wants to know how their child's doing. It's very simple, and they actually deserve to have that information. So report cards, critically important. We heard from teachers, ongoing communication, most important, right? But there are other measures that teachers have access to that we believe are also important for parents to know. And that school performance rating now, that's more widely available, another piece of the puzzle, if you will. All of this is what it makes up, that accurate picture. It isn't just one sole measure. So we're encouraged to know that parents are very responsive to the data. And so to that end, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney Lopez Aflito, my colleague, who's our Vice President for Content and Partnerships, and she's going to share a little bit about how we at Learning Heroes are turning research into action. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy.
Thanks, Bib. So to help address this disconnect and leaning into all of the parent mindset insights we've learned along the way, we've been laser focused on helping parents have an accurate picture of their child's progress so that they can best support these specific grade level skills at home. And we do this in a few different ways, including our 3 seasonal campaigns that provide parents with concrete actions and resources depending on key transition times of the school year. So today we're happy to give a little bit of a sneak peek of our Spring Ahead campaign that launches officially tomorrow and is designed to help connect parents to various measures that together give them a bigger picture. So the primary call to action with this campaign is to connect parents to their state's practice tests for the upcoming annual state test so that they can help ease their child's nerves a bit around the test and so that they, for themselves, can see the kind of real-world skills that the test covers. To round that out a bit, additional actions and resources that we connect parents to as part of the campaign include linking them to information about their state's school report cards, which cover important information about their child's learning environment and more. examples of questions that they can be asking their child's teacher, depending on the grade their child is in, as they stay in regular contact with their teacher. And finally, we also connect parents to the new Readiness Check, which is an interactive digital tool that gives parents a quick gut check on how their child is progressing with foundational skills in reading and math, and most importantly, immediately connects them to skill-specific resources and activities to support learning at home. All of the campaign's research-based resources will be live on our website tomorrow, and we're really happy to co-brand these bilingual parent take-home piece, the one you see here on your screen, with your organization or district's logo. The print version is really great for sharing at in-person events or through backpack folders, on bulletin boards, and the digital version, as you can imagine, can be shared on portals, email newsletters, or social media. Another new tool that we created as part of the Parents 2018 research is what we call From Puzzle to Plan, a family worksheet. The goal of the tool is to help strengthen existing parent-teacher communication and move towards more open and honest conversations around grade-level progress and mastery. So sort of taking the mystery out of the different puzzle pieces that I think both Whitney and Landon alluded to, and putting them together to form a really clear picture that then informs an actionable plan. That's the goal of the tool. And while we fully acknowledge that there is no silver bullet with any of these tools, the purpose is really to help advance communication and support existing infrastructures and programs. So with all of our work, we want to continue to learn alongside of you all. So with Puzzle to Plan, it includes 3 main steps that can be done as part, again, of parent-teacher conferences or existing meetings. And the first step is for the teacher to share a grade-level indicator using formative assessment data that already exists, that the school is using, so whether that be MAP or DIBELS, and then also share their own observation. The second and third steps invite the child and then the parent to share their individual reflections on areas that need more support and areas where they are doing well. And then finally, on the back side of the tool, there are specific questions and prompts that help teachers, students, and parents work together to create a plan of action while also providing additional online resources and supports. This is a new pilot tool, as I mentioned, and that we've refined based on this year's research. And so we're happy to work with you to co-brand and customize it. And we will be sending out a follow-up email and form tomorrow for those interested in these co-branded bilingual resources.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. So this is David again. We've gotten some really great questions in, so thank you very much for your questions. If you have a question, if it's in your mind and you haven't put it in the chat box yet, please go ahead and do so. There's still some time, and we'd love to spend some time going over what's on your mind. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bib to start answering some of the questions we've received.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you to all of you for your engagement so far. I really appreciate that. We've received a few questions that all sort of fit into kind of one theme, so we thought that would be worth sharing with the whole community. And I think this question summarizes it well. Why are all these issues negative? No calls for positive for growth, and are there any positive reasons for contacting, I think connecting teachers and parents? So I think that's an excellent question, and what we found through our research, as Adam said initially, we conducted a significant amount of qualitative research, so in-depth interviews with teachers in particular, which means just one-on-one conversations with a whole range of different kinds of teachers from 6 different states. And what we heard from them over and over and over again was just how hard it was to have these conversations with parents. So that's what we dug into, and we got that list of what are the most challenging reasons for you, what makes it most difficult. We got them straight from the teachers' mouths, and wanted to see quantitatively how that played out. But what we were really encouraged by, and where we're focusing our efforts, and you saw this in the Spring Ahead flyer that Wendy just talked about, that teachers say ongoing communications is the most important way to know how a child is achieving. And isn't that amazing? Like, to me, that's so positive. if we can just bring parents and teachers together through whatever means, as Whitney was saying, in terms that meet both the parent and teacher's, time demands. It can be online, it can be a chat, it can be a text, it can be written, it can be face-to-face. There are lots of ways that parents and teachers do come together in really powerful ways. And so for us, that was super positive, and exciting to see. And we're trying to encourage parents, and again, through Puzzle to Plan, go in and talk to the teacher, share your observations. You're the expert on your child. And hear from the teacher directly about how your child is performing. So for us, that was incredibly positive, but it was really based on the qualitative lessons that we heard from teachers as to how we got those initial, why is it so difficult? I don't know, Adam, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only piece to add, and Babe, you're absolutely right, there's always limited real estate when you're talking about a survey and you have so many questions you want your audiences to answer. Another reason why we focused on that list is something that parents told us. And parents repeatedly told us that they rely on the teacher to let them know what's going on, but also that they interpret no information as good news. It means everything's fine. So if a teacher isn't sharing, exactly, no news is good news, heard it over and over again. So if a teacher isn't sharing information, a parent isn't going to necessarily think that there's something that could potentially be corrected, or the parent perception isn't necessarily reality. So we wanted to dig into what might be some of those scenarios where information isn't being communicated, where there might be some real opportunities, Viv, as you rightly pointed out, to bring parents and teachers together so they can have an honest reflection about what's going on in the classroom.
Great. So thank you so much for pointing that out, though. I think it's a great question. So hopefully we've addressed it, and if not, please do send us emails because we're happy to talk further about it. We have a couple of other questions that I'm going to get through as well. So another great question, is there any research on how report cards are structured? Is any type of report card more or less effective? I think that is a question for this community on this phone call. I know Ed Navigator and Whitney, you're on the phone. I know you guys look at report cards really, with a very, not critical meaning bad, but just like a thoughtful lens. And so I don't know, Whitney, if you've got any answers for that question in particular.
Yeah, so we do a lot of in-depth analysis of student records. Report cards would be included in that. And what we found is format is largely an issue with many report cards. In a place like New Orleans, where our district is largely charter schools, that means that there are hundreds of report cards that we see. And we do get a chance to really see high quality ones that sometimes have a lot of anecdotal data, ones that sometimes have translated many of the types of performance where kids who may be performing well, it may not be clear what an A or B means, but adding additional context around what that may look like has been one that we've seen schools tend to be able to communicate better information to parents. And then there's a lot of report cards that often have codes on them, and the code sometimes may be around what the child's behavior may be, or sometimes the codes may sometimes reference how a kid performed on some type of cumulative assessment. And those things are the things that we find parents bringing the records to us and saying, help, like we don't really know what this means. And then we may try to have communications with the schools to say, can you simplify this a bit more? Can you make sure that this is going out in a way that really speaks the language of the families. And oftentimes schools would do a lot to get together and try to revamp the way that they do it. But those are just two small examples of things that we've seen work, which would be anecdotal information on the report card. Because again, going back to the research that you guys have done, it seems that parents can understand the information when it is clarified and when it is clear. But when there are things that are coded and things that aren't all the way helpful to a parent's understanding. Like, they're not statisticians. They won't understand the graphs and charts that a lot of schools put there. But when we have that additional context, that's always going to help them be much more informed, so that when they are in the in-person parent-teacher conferences, they are prepared with their questions. They're prepared with the ways in which they want to better understand.
Thank you so much, Whitney. I'm going to answer one more quick question and then turn it over to David, who's got a few other questions coming in, so thank you all for your thoughtful questions. One of the other areas that we work on is around the school-based report cards that we've, I think, been mentioning. Now that there's an ESSA requirement that states have to issue school-based report cards that are accessible to multiple stakeholders, including families, we took it upon ourselves to do a pretty significant deep dive of research with actually Adam's group as well, in 4 different states, and we built a parent-friendly school report card from the ground up. So it really reflects what parents care most about. So I think this question came from Brian. Brian, we will get you a link to the school-based report card template that we developed that preferences what parents care most about, even though it is ESSA compliant. There are 21 indicators that have to be captured on these report cards, so it's a lot of information to digest, and parents certainly preference certain information over others, so we formatted it that way, but I'm happy to share that link with you and with others as well, but just wanted to address that terrific question. David, do you want to?
Yeah, and so, I'm going to actually turn it over to Wendy Lopez-Aflito with a question that we received. Can you suggest resources for parents who feel they don't have the ability to support kids academically? How do we build parent accountability for parents who use those excuses not to engage at home?
Yeah, I think, again, that's a really thoughtful question, and I think one that is really grounded in the reality for many parents, right? Whether that be because of their own education level or just even time and bandwidth, right? For so many families who are working, 2 and 3 jobs and just don't have that time. So I would say a couple of things. One, just sort of referencing back the readiness check, the new tool that we've created to help parents get a gut check on their child's progress with foundational skills. I think what's most innovative about the tool is that it immediately connects parents to highly curated skill-specific resources that they can use. And the resources are what's sort of called both learn and practice resources. So learn being, videos that explain the specific skill if the parent can't necessarily explain it, and then practice more along the lines of interactive activities that the child can then use to practice that specific skill. And so the resources on there have been highly curated, and they include some really, there's outstanding content out there, whether that's, Khan Academy or, our partners at Great Schools have some really great videos in both English and Spanish that really show what specific skills look like in both reading and math at various grades. So, again, there's lots of great content out there. What we've tried to do with some of our tools is sort of curate that. But I think it's a really important question.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. And Adam, turning it over to you with another question. You provided some breakout at the start about the differences among racial groups. How much difference do you find in the more detailed responses between the most economically challenged and lower poverty families and schools?
Also another important question. And to be honest, we were rather struck by how consistent results were generally. Now, of course, there were some differences if we look at specific item to item. We don't necessarily have time to go through that level of specificity right now. Happy to follow up later. But when it came to the confidence that the parents have and how well their children are doing, the reliance on the report card, the interpretation of grades, how they tend to engage, although differences in frequency, certainly when we look at parents in lower income situations or some of our other subgroups, there were some differences. But overall, on the whole, especially as it related to the disconnect and reactions to materials, the responses were markedly consistent. Again, don't want to paint too broad a brushstroke here. There were some important demographic differences in a couple of these items, but overall, again, with this focus on the disconnect, relatively consistent in terms of that initial level of confidence and what it took to change parent perception.
Great. Thank you, Adam. So I've got 2 wonderful, not questions, but comments and some suggestions from you that I think are worth sharing with this broader community. So Angela shares that her practice as a first grade teacher over many years was to make weekly phone calls with positive comments to parents. Love that. That's amazing. I called them sunshine phone calls and shared observations of positive behaviors their child exhibited. Many times the parents reported that they really needed to know productive footsteps in support of their children. This all took time, and that is what teachers seem to need most. So that is sort of the conundrum and the tension. But thank you, Angela, for sharing that. That's so powerful, and would hope that more teachers can find time and ways to do that, because you can automatically see how meaningful that is. And then Elliot shares that one strategy to use to improve communication report cards is providing separate indicators for academic versus habits of work and learning that way good behavior can't make a C on academics look like an A. So Elliot, that's also a fantastic example of some of the smart ways to go about this to help parents sort of see that full picture. Because your child behaving well, that's important. Are they turning in their homework and having, making friends and able to ask good questions? All of that's critical, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're reading on grade level. So really important suggestion. So thank you. And with that, I think I have a couple more questions. You want to take this one, David?
Yeah, so what are the best levers for making change on this front in school systems, e.g. raising authentic parent communication to the forefront, unions, school boards, superintendents, principals? Landon, are you still with us? It would be great if you could take a stab at that.
As the former FACE director and where you are now.
Schools, right.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to take a crack at this. I mean, I think the answer is it's all of the above. I think we need, especially in this moment of polarization in our national political climate, and our national education climate, and our local education climates, we need all groups to come together for a vision for partnership in the system. And that's going to require trying to get coalitions to come together on what that vision is. I love the idea of sunshine calls. Like I just think that's one of those things that, paired with some of the amazing tools and resources that Learning Heroes has put together, could really just transform the culture and climate of school systems and schools and networks of schools. And so, I think it sometimes requires really clear advocacy aims. We're working with the coalition right now in Colorado that essentially is asking, it's a bunch of different community groups that's going to be asking a school district to make sure that at least one meeting a year at a school includes a conversation about performance. That's not a rule or a policy that's uniform across a lot of school systems. So pick the issue that's going to allow for maximum partnership leverage, whether it's the sunshine calls, home visits, or a conversation like that. Bring a diverse coalition together and start pushing for change.
Great, thanks, Landon. And Michelle Montemayor, question for you. So what does ongoing communication look like? Do I email the teacher every day?
Ongoing communication can mean a face-to-face meeting, an email, however the situation warrants. But the parent needs to also follow up and not rely on the teacher to get all the information. There needs to be a communication both ways, and the parent needs to take on whatever duties the teacher might assign them to help with that child's issue as far as the grades or behavior or whatever it is. It needs to be a continuous conversation, yes.
Thank you, Michelle. And so we are just about out of time. I know we have some other questions that we weren't able to get to. So what we're going to do, we're going to follow up with you. And Wendy mentioned that we were going to follow up with an email. We're going to give you an opportunity to get back to us if you're interested in co-branding some of the materials that Wendy mentioned. We'll also answer some of the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer on this webinar, so you get that information from us as well. We really hope that you'll stay in touch with us. A reminder, this was recorded, so if you wanted to share it with colleagues or friends, we encourage you to do that. If you want to listen to it again, we encourage you to do that. Just go to our website, bealearninghero.org. And feel free to contact us also with any additional questions or requests or ideas. We'd love for this to be a continued dialogue and really appreciate your time today. So thanks so much for all of you for your participation. Terrific interaction. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.